Hello and welcome back to the Painted Mini. My name is Travis, I'm your host, and this is episode 2. Last time we took a look at Trudvang legends, we discussed the Garms or Hellhounds, their origins, and then we painted them up. If you haven't seen the first episode, please go back and check it out. Today we're going to look at the guy who's on the box cover. This is Two-Cleavers, our resident ogre. And what better day than a rainy day in Texas to discuss the origin of the ogre. Today we paint the enigmatic Two-Cleavers. Trudvang tells us early on that beneath that massive Thulsa Doom helm lies an ogre. Where does an ogre fit into this Nordic pantheon of gods and monsters? In all likelihood it doesn't. But we won't have to look too far to find the connective tissue. If we look to similar massive brutal beasts, we find kinship with the trolls of Jotun of Norse mythology. We have ancient Grendel who triggered Beowulf's call to action. We have Polyphemus of Greek mythology, Humbaba from the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Oni in Japanese folklore. Even the Witch of Hansel and Gretel could don this mythological mantle. Ogres themselves are a medieval invention dating back to Chrétien de Troyes, the late 12th century Romance author, whose French verse Percival le Comte de Graal contains the following. And it is written that he will come again to all the realms of Logres, which was formerly land of ogres, and destroy them all with that lance. Logres was the name of the realm which inhabited Camelot. It is derived from the medieval Welsh name Loegr, a name of uncertain origin referring to south and eastern England. Many believe the root of ogre to be from the Etruscan god Orcus, who was known for being a brute who exhibited cannibalistic traits. The root word for both ogre and orc is largely believed to derive from Hongrois, which means Hungarian. There's ample evidence of Western culture referring to Hungarians as monstrous. It could also be derived from the biblical Amorite king Og, who was considered the last survivor of the giant Rephaitis. His bed was made of iron and was more than 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. He is described in Psalms 135:11 and 136:20 as, his height was like the height of the cedars, and his strength was like that of the oaks. Regardless, the term was made common in the 17th century with Charles Perrault's Tales of Mother Goose, where they are featured in various forms throughout. The common aspects found in the various tales of ogres depict them as large, brutal beasts with a taste for human flesh, especially that of children. Surprisingly, many early artistic depictions feature ogres that are far more human than their modern counterparts. These more human depictions create the added trope of a monster living among us, the cannibalistic beast that exists in our midst. A far more sinister version than the high fantasy ogres that have since come to represent the wild, tribal, subhuman cultures that raid and rampage throughout the wilderness. Has modern culture outgrown the fear of the flesh-eating monster? Not hardly. But let's paint Two-Cleavers and pay a little homage to a worthy candidate in our pantheon of mythological all-stars. Okay, I start out by painting everything. I have this sort of a fleshy purple color I wanted to use as an underlayment for everything else. You'll notice that here I've gone ahead and used classical silly putty to kind of mask out the weapons. And then once that underlayer color is on, I just went with a Mournfang brown for sort of a dark flesh tone. And now what I'm doing is I've decided instead of using regular shadow colors, anything would be more interesting than dark brown or black. So I'm just going in with a dark purple. Again, just trying to play on this flesh theme. So this dark purple going into all the shadows, the deepest recesses. It's a little experimental jazz here. And then I take a second and I go through and I get some scarlet into these deep cuts. I have to thin it down so it'll flow down into those cuts well. And then I lighten up a bit from the Mournfang brown, and I hit all of the top areas, the highlights, and I'm not being real precise here. You can see how thin the paint is, just kind of barely going on, but it's definitely lighter. Gonna have it lighten it up even a little bit more. And just kind of hastily hitting those highlight areas. I'm not trying to be super precise here. Okay, I'm really just kind of going in now with just showing the process a little bit. I always add a little bit of water. I add some white, and then I add a touch of yellow just to kind of warm it up a little bit. And then I'm going to check it against the model itself and decide it needs to be a little brighter for the next color up. And now I'm just going to go in, and as I get further up with the highlights, I get a little bit more precise, but I'm always painting in the previous area. And notice there's a little bit of video missing here. I did go through and hit everything up to that point with a wash. So I'm just using a sepia wash, watered down a bit. I went over everything just to try to pull those colors in. And now once it's dry, I'm going back in on top with some more highlight. You can see I'm just grabbing those knuckles. Again, just on the top where the light's going to hit the model. Here I'm going in with some blue, kind of a gray blue. There's some veins present in the model, so I definitely wanted to hit those with some color. And then I kind of had to freehand a little bit of vein in myself, just to sort of connect some things. And then after I have that color on the vein and it dries, I go in with another wash. This one's got that little bit more of a red tint to it for skin tones. And I'm back to just kind of touching up with even a lighter blue, sort of hitting the very highlight part of the veins. A lot of this is going to come out kind of a gray blue in the end, which is fine. Going back in with that scarlet, kind of redoing the scars after the wash has done its thing, which is fine. You end up with a couple of different registers of that color. One's muted down. It ends up just looking more like scar tissue, I think. Okay, this is kind of a big time jump here. My camera ran out and I didn't catch it right away. But all I've done so far is I've put one coat of just solid green matte paint, kind of a forest green, and now I'm going in with a lighter color and creating just little islands of clouds. Okay, looking at the model and all of that skin tone and everything, there's a little bit of color on the helmet, a little bit of color from the jewelry that Two-Cleavers is wearing maybe. But I just wanted something else, something to really make the model stand out, a good strong contrast. So I decided the blade, and I noticed that you can see it here in this shot, it looks like you have these steel girders riveting through something, like really riveting in. So it made me think, well, it doesn't necessarily need to be a piece of metal in that case. What would explain that strange cradling if it were just a steel blade with a tine going through the handle? So I decided that it would be a big giant chunk of jade. So I just pulled up some jade reference images. Notice that jade looks like green stone with little clouds. So I just kind of went in with a very hasty stippling approach and just dabbing in clouds, flattening it out layer on layer here. And just like normal highlighting, when I get that brighter color, I'm only going inside of the previous color. Here I'm, and the reason I bounce back and forth so much as I paint this is because it's a single model. So as I paint something, I need it to dry. So I'll just move on to a different part of the model and then get back to what I was doing before. I'm not trying to give you whiplash or anything. If I was painting like the Garms, I'd paint up to a point with one, set it aside, grab the next one, do the same thing, and I could just go sort of in batch mode. But with a single model like this, especially a bigger model, I just paint something, get it to a point, and then have to go find something else to play with while it dries. You can see there I just use, I believe it was a snakebite leather contrast paint to do the leather strappings. I'm going to use that same color for his thumbnails, fingernails, toenails. I get those leather cords on his arms. And then I think I also like this color for shading. I'll just go through and do some sort of specific line shading using that contrast paint. It works really well. You can see above that braided armband, it looks like I used a little strip of contrast paint just to kind of outline. Just going back to the blade now, getting another layer in. Just think of Bob Ross and happy little clouds, happy little trees. Just dabbing away. I think what gave me the idea for the jade sword was looking at his necklace. I figured that looked like a jade chunk of stone. And because it's a magic sword in my mind, I want it to be very pristine, so it's probably the only thing that doesn't get weathered or rusted out in some way. Everything else I weathered pretty heavily. And this is just Citadel's green glaze, just to give it a little bit more depth, a little bit more marbling, smooth out the edges a little bit. And notice that nasty brush I use for metallics, because if your brush doesn't already look like that, it will soon after. Metallics are just really hard on bristles. So just use a separate cheap brush. Now I'm just taking contrast and because that's Space Wolves Gray, and I'm just going and doing the leathery loincloth. Again, I didn't want to do brown just because there's plenty of brown register in this mini. I wanted to pick something else. There are a bunch of little arrow shafts stuck into Two-Cleavers' body, so I had to go and hit on those. Now I'm just using gold metallic and doing the bracelets. I'll also do the bands around the helmet. He also has some trinkets on his bracelets, his necklace, that have a little bit of gold to them. Get that insignia on the scabbard, just like a little Celtic knot. Nice touch. And there's this, looks like a bird skull on top of his helm, so I wanted it to stand out, so I'm gonna go ahead and hit that with the gold color also. And then looking at the box, the helmet looks like it's got a green tint to it, so I'm gonna use a contrast paint on top of that metallic, and it's going to do a nice tint to the helmet. Almost looks like a weathered effect. Here I'm just kind of going in and doing the necklace, so it also looks like a piece of jade, maybe not from the same, maybe not the same piece. Maybe this ogre has a propensity for collecting jade. For the hair, instead of using black, I'll usually go with a dark purple, or I'll mix a little purple and black, or blue and black. I'll just put a little bit of color in there. Going back to that necklace to get some Again, that jade stone cloudiness. And here you can see tinting the helmet. Kind of using a contrast paint similar to the way you would use a glaze. It's a little stronger. And then a couple of little final touches. There's a little skull on his belt. It's a little bracelet that looks like it might be made of bird skulls or little mammals. I'm using the white from the skull and just going in and using it to do a little highlighting. Just touching around the edge of the lips, the mouth. Very edge of that helm. Whatever I'm trying there with that bicep, it does not work. I think I end up just taking it out. Getting some more color, using a real bright sort of electric blue to create some edge on that sword handle, and bringing out some of the detail from the sculptor. They have leather straps holding these iron rings. And again, just trying to use colors other than standard registers here. I think Paul Bonner's art sort of calls for a little bit of whimsy. Translates into a little brighter color palette in my mind. And keep in mind, as always, my minis don't look quite this bright once I get them on a table. Put highlights to show those iron rings a little more, bring that shape out, and just get lost in the shadows otherwise. Close here. I'm kind of going in here to add some weathering to the leather, just lightening it up, and then I'll go over it with a sepia wash to bring that tone back down. So if you know you're going to use a wash, you just have to go in brighter than you normally would. Everything has to be keyed up a notch. If you're a photographer, you can think in f-stops. Oh, sorry, I don't know. Two-Cleavers has the jitters there. You can see the leather straps and then the leather belts. Now I'm going into his actual cleaver, his one cleaver. I guess he lost the other one somewhere. And I'm putting in that typhus corrosion, I think it's called. Technical stuff. It just gives it a good dry, it's like a dried oil look. It's good for rust effects. It gives it a little bit of grain texture too. So it just makes it dark, very matte and textured. Kind of go over it with a little bit of rust tinting, and then I'll do a real brief dry brush with it, and it'll catch some of that grain. putting some of that corrosion on the helmet. I wanted the helmet to be, I was thinking about this, I don't know if ogres are like trolls and they're aversion to iron. Just imagine this, at least this troll-kin creature with a helmet stuck to his head, how angry he would be. Just the pain, the discomfort of that iron burning in all the time. He'd probably go grab a giant sword and a cleaver and wreak havoc on the villages. So put a little bit of rust on the helmet, a lot on this cleaver. I just want to look like a chunk of iron. It's been out in that swampy wilderness with him for too long. Okay. I'm going to add a little bit of rust. It's a rust wash by Vallejo, I believe. You can tell I've already applied this on that blade before. Just putting a little bit more on top. Rust happens over time. It's okay to have different tints and ages. And this is a very, very controlled, quick dry brush. I'm not dry brushing the whole model. Just want some parts of that helmet, a couple of places on the weapons. Trying to get that texture from the typhus corrosion to show up with the dry brush. More blotches here. I think we're about done.